I think that if you do not explore the messy and the bad and the dark, it's not a Christian story because you're
Agreed.
then leaving out the entire purpose that we need salvation and that we need Jesus. And it's just true. If we want to stay in that cushy, everything is good world, we no longer have an enemy, we no longer need our savior, etc., etc. And that's not a Christian story because the whole point is admitting we're really broken, this is really bad, please help us.
Hello, and welcome back to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm your co-host, David Rethemeyer.
And I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brush.
And today we are joined by another guest that is another one of our own. We are delighted to call them a member of the Unbound family, but Briley Crisafi, who is our guest today, is not only an Unbound alumni, but somebody who has an incredible amount of experience and wisdom and insight specifically into the fine arts and entertainment and what that looks like from a Christian worldview. And so I think that if you're somebody who is interested in the arts and what that looks like from a Christian perspective, I think this conversation is going to be especially impactful for you.
Briley Crisafi, welcome to the Be Unbound podcast. And we're all chuckling a little bit because it's actually welcome back because we had a previous attempt at this. And the internet and technology allows us to do these awesome interviews without having to fly all over the country. Didn't like us last time. And so we've actually recorded one of these. We didn't get to keep it. So we're getting to record
The
another one.
technology is awesome with an asterisk.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
And so this is kind of take two, which means we're kind of already warmed up. So for the audience that you've never had a rehearsed podcast before, and we get to start, which allows us to kind of jump right in. So Briley, first of all, give us a little bit of background of who you are. And then based on stuff we talked about last time, I'm ready with about 8 questions. So we're ready to roll here.
That's fantastic. Well, Jonathan, thanks so much for having me on correctly this time. Yes. So right now, I'm super, super blessed to be just doing what I think the Unbound mission is, which is using your design to do extraordinary things with the ordinary. And so right now, I have the privilege of teaching Spanish and running a performing arts program at a private school here in South Florida. That's actually a homeschool hybrid. So it's very cool seeing, just the homeschool community flex and grow and keep venturing into all these different avenues. I also am now I've been at the Multi-Jupiter Theater for 2 years as the choreographer and dance instructor for their conservatory, which has been incredible to see it kind of rise from the COVID ashes and like triple in size in the past year or so, which has been amazing. I am also a writer for Andy Andrews Wisdom Harbor Studios, which is just such a blessing because what an incredible group of people and collection of minds to get to learn from and rub shoulders with and contribute to. And I have also gotten in the past couple of years to work pretty heavily with different organizations and missions in Latin America. And so I couldn't be more grateful to God because I think for so much of my life, I felt like, wow, I have all these different loves and interests that I'd like to pursue pretty seriously because I do think that they were given to me by God on purpose. I think I was created that way, but it's so frustrating feeling like I have this 9-track mind and I don't know where I'm going with it. And in my first year of college, I learned to kind of relinquish that, at least the belief that I had any control over that and understand God absolutely has this. And if he's going to use the way that you were designed, all you have to do is start moving because he can't steer an anchored ship and trust him and allow him to open those opportunities up in front of you. And so I'm very grateful for that insight and that teaching that I received in my first year with Unbound because since then it's just been so fruitful. And like I said, I couldn't feel more blessed or more grateful.
Well, as you can tell, Briley doesn't do much. I mean, she mostly just sits around and there has hardly anything going on. But if you're not paying attention, there's a definite theme through that. And there's a fine arts theme, one of performance and acting and music. And so Briley was a student with Unbound. And so we got to know her through there. She was also a member of our leadership team, the student cabinet. And that was just a real blessing for us. But one of the things that I noticed first off with Briley is that it was at Apex and for our talent show, we have just amazing talent that comes to our talent show at Apex. And so there's always some really great acts and a really great talent that's on display there. And so Briley came and sang an original song. And look, we have really talented people in lots of aspects of music and Unbound. But when Briley sang, immediately I was like, whoa, that's the difference between sort of really talented amateur and professional. And there was a level of gifting and level of skill that was unusual. Now, I set all that up because it's always nice to compliment Briley, and so I don't mind doing that. But I set that up for a bigger reason, which is this, and that is I have a deep passion that says that if you really want to change the culture, you have to change the culture's storytelling. And that so often we get distracted and we think that salvation flies in an Air Force One, so we focus on politics, or we get distracted on all these other things. And yet, I don't think there's any really argument. And if you've got one, I'll entertain it, but I'll work hard to refute it.
Mm.
That if you really want to change this culture, change the stories. And if you look at why our culture has changed and you don't like the changes, you can trace that back to a difference in storytelling. And so, to build a better culture, you have to tell better stories. Now, what's interesting to me is that I have an awful lot of people who can tell better stories, and Briley's one of them. She mentioned she's a writer for Wisdom Harbor, and I've seen her writing and experienced it. And by the way, you should go to Wisdom Harbor, and that's Wisdom is Harbour. And if you search that in Google, you'll come up with it, and you should definitely subscribe to them and check out what they've got there. But what is less common is the upfront talent. It's the behind the camera talent. It's the on stage talent. And Briley has an interesting mix of those. So Briley, I want to kind of focus on that a little bit because I'm so excited about that and I'm so interested in that. And I want to start a question that we've talked about personally a couple of times. And I want you to kind of examine a little bit like what's the difference between Christian art and art that is inspired by Christian belief? Because to me, I think there's a big gulf between those two things that's really important, but most people don't take time to really think about that.
I'd absolutely agree with you, and thank you for the compliments. Yes, actually, you mentioned something that I'd love to touch on here, and that is that kind of amidst that time in my life where I felt like I was struggling with the 9-track mind and it felt like everything was going in a million different directions, I did come to identify something that all these things have in common, and that is storytelling in and of itself. And why? Why does that bind art with writing, with people, with language, et cetera, et cetera? It's because it's the tool that actually reaches people at their core. It reaches them in the place that is who they are. It's something that is inspiring and also inviting. And so I see art in all mediums, from film to music to dance to poetry, as one of the most powerful tools as far as influencing culture goes. You look at things like The Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, right? And there are these huge, they literally transcend time in terms of a cultural cornerstone from generation to generation. And it is really interesting to look at why that is. So I mentioned Lord of the Rings, so it's so pertinent here because I agree with you, Jonathan. I think that it is very important to have Christian in the arts and communications industry. Obviously, I think we actually need Christians in every industry in the world, right? We're called to be in the world, but not of it. So there's nothing that says we should be some little bubble that only allows certain things in and then pushes other things out or produces certain things to pump out. That's not the way it works. That's not even biblical. The thing is, however, since we have this massively powerful tool in these different mediums, we, I believe, have a responsibility to use them widely. And so there's totally a place for the purely Christian entertainment. You know, I look to people like Dallas Jenkins and what he's doing. I think it's incredible. The Kendrick brothers, bigger names, Kirk Cameron, Mel Gibson. Everything that they've done is really, really cool. However, there is that kind of undertone of this will be overtly Christian, and I believe it only reaches a certain audience, and therefore isn't necessarily categorized as culture changing in the same way that you were talking about right now. Why has Lord of the Rings done that? Okay, it actually has a Christian backbone, meaning people like Lewis and Tolkien in their writing, all of their research and all of their inspiration was very, very Christ steeped, as I put it. And they were very intentional about the kind of allegories that they were making with their work and the kind of values that they were putting forth, even as far as the kind of valor and selflessness and with absolute love that we see in those characters that we so admire. And so I am extremely inspired by that vein of writing, that vein of storytelling, which says, hey, we're going to have an awesome piece of art, piece of entertainment. It's going to tell an awesome story. We have control over the message that we're putting out. Let's make it something that doesn't bash people over the head with this is only Christian or this is not for you. Let's make it something that totally draws people in from all different walks of life or interests, etc., but then serves them the exact same product, which is this is how we want to curb culture. This is the story that we want to wind up collectively telling. And I think one of the things I was most attracted to in the Unbound community in general is that people's understanding of how to do that. And it's very unique and it's very difficult to find. And when you do find it, it is very, very empowering.
So I think it's a great explanation, Bradley. And so let me unpack that a little bit. So thinking about Lord of the Rings, I tell people all the time, I, at some level, think that it's great that there is a spot for something like God's Not Dead. Chosen's maybe sort of crosses that line a little bit where it's sort of relevant to both inside and outsiders. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with sort of inside entertainment for Christians, and Christians say, yeah, I understand that they're speaking my language. But I don't think we should fool ourselves and think a film like God's Not Dead is going to do anything to move the culture. It will reinforce a group that's already there, but it doesn't change anybody else's. And David's got his skeptical eyes on, so I don't know that it's necessarily an example of high art either. So I'm not defending it that way. But then if we move to something like Lord of the Rings, I would, people say, well, how's that Christian? Well, I tell people it's got some pretty interesting things. It's almost like it fertilizes the ground and plows it for the seed to be planted. You have this act of self-sacrifice. You have the weak becoming strong. You have somebody who at the end can't fulfill what they're supposed to do. And so outside forces have to do that. I mean, like there's all so many things that are
And also
reflective
the
of the
acknowledgement
people.
of spiritual warfare.
And some of the Lord of the Rings is helpful because I've maybe even said this podcast before. My brother has said one of his great disappointments in life is that he can't fight orcs. You can love to live in a world where you can fight orcs, right? And while that's true, that we have to remember that we don't live in that world. Lord of the Rings is helpful because it does give us a way to sort of categorize and look at evil. And so there's just so much richness there. So with all that sort of said, and as a setup, Briley, you said that you choreograph and you work for a dance studio. And so it's not a Christian dance studio. Okay. So it's a secular dance studio. It serves secular audiences. So I want to kind of put some real practical bones on this and hit the rubber, hit the road and say, okay, so Briley, whether it's with this studio or something else, you're asked to choreograph a show for a quote unquote normal audience. Okay. This is going to be a show that will be on stage and it has no labels affixed to it. What's the difference between how you choreograph that show from a Christian worldview versus, say, somebody else who wouldn't come from that background? Because there's a medium that I think, to some extent, it's like, okay, well, I only tell these kinds of stories. Okay, but dance is a little more abstract on the storytelling, perhaps. And so, what would be the differences there? Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And this is becoming more and more pertinent in my life. I just finished dancing with a contemporary ballet company from New York that was doing their 10-year anniversary here in Florida at the Kravis Center, which is a national theater. And the founder of that company is Buddhist and runs her life according to that faith. However, and this is something that I find more and more frequently, which I think I was ignorant of and I'm pleasantly surprised by, there were so many strong Christians that I met through working with her and dancing for that company. And one of these women is a Christian choreographer that I admire a lot. And I think that distinction is very interesting to make. The first one that comes to mind is that when I choreograph for my students and when I'm instructing them, my language is very rooted in how I carry myself on the daily basis, right? Like, I think one thing about Christian artists is that there should be no differentiation. This is just integrity talking between who you are in that setting versus any other setting. And so I'll tell my kids things that I think are such a blessing or things that I think are innate gifts of theirs or why they are created to be X, Y, Z, which just stems from having an identity in Christ and knowing that he is good, that God is good. Then there are other things where, like, I actually just finished teaching an intensive on auditioning as a skill, but like everything else, it's a muscle that has to be worked and practiced. And I told my students, I said, if you take nothing else away from this week, please hear me say this. Because children are very scared of rejection. in this context specifically, right? They're auditioning for schools or for roles or whatever it is. And it's like the scariest thing in the world is to be told no. And I told them that is so not true. Because number one, what happened in that audition room with 3 to 5 minutes of your life has nothing to do with who you actually are. Number two, the doors that get closed and opened are closed and opened very, very intentionally. You know, you could be being protected from something by not being a part of a show or a school or a process, or being saved for something better, an opportunity that's going to arise that you don't know about yet. And I just am very intentional about instilling that perspective in people, because I have come to know firsthand in my life how I am not the author, right? And praise the Lord, because I wouldn't be very good at it. God has written my life, yes, giving me free will and the choice to obey him, but still, he has placed things in front of me and opened and closed certain doors that, yeah, at certain points I would be super, super disappointed or despondent with the way that something turned out. But he took that brokenness or that hopelessness and totally turned it into good, or turned it into something for his glory, turned it into something beautiful to bless somebody else. So obviously, at no point in that spiel did I say to my kids, God is in control of your life. You need to trust Jesus. He has a plan for you. That's what I mean, and that's what's true. But it allows them to hear the truth without hearing the buzzwords that might make them say, oh, my family doesn't believe in that. I'm not supposed to believe that either. That must be wrong. That's number one, is even though dance is, yes, more abstract than concrete storytelling, because we get to use words, and the interaction with people and the way that you relate to people is fundamental. Jonathan, it was you who said to me, all of life is in the context of relationship, right? And that just is so true. And so the way that you interact with the people that you're working with or teaching or choreographing for is paramount. The second thing, and this would be more along the lines of the actual artistry, is God gave us these bodies to use as vessels of worship. These bodies are temples to be taken care of and to be used as a way of glorifying him. I firmly believe that. And I love so much our base camp that was about the relationship between spiritual and physical health. There's a direct correlation there. So the way that I use my body can very literally either honor or not honor him. And I think we all can understand what that would look like. There are plenty of concrete examples in life and in media and in worldly entertainment, very sadly. And so that is also a huge thing, is just going at it from the perspective of, number one, am I taking care of this gift that is my body that he's given me? Two, am I challenging myself to become better and pursue this gifting that he's given me with my body? And three, are the actual things I'm doing with it, the shapes that I'm making, the people that I come in contact with, the emotion that I capture and invoke while doing this, is this going to honor him and plant seeds and point people towards him or not? Because I think whether you're a Christian or not, you have actually very palpably experienced that something can either embody light and point towards light, or embody darkness and point toward darkness. And that is just going to ring true in everything that we do.
I just thought that last point was really particularly helpful. So first of all, just to summarize, I think that's great. So first of all, it's the way you treat other people. So and at base camp, we say time and task only makes sense in the context of relationships, which is kind of an extension of that. The second part I found really fascinating, which was, by using your body, you're using it as an act of worship towards God. And then I think the last point there was that, embody, you're using that to show light or to bring darkness. And so there's an intentionality there. So it's that purpose and intentionality I find that's really interesting. I wanted to take that same idea, because I think what I find pretty frustrating, Briley, is that it's like, Christian art has an altar call at the end and doesn't do bad things. And
Okay.
non-Christian art has all these bad things in. And I don't think that that's accurate, right? I mean, in other words, I think that what
No.
happens is that you get then this kind of sugary sweet, not real, not connected to reality, hallmarkish type art that's then considered Christian, which is often by definition of a lower skill level and a lower talent level, and it doesn't speak to real life.
Yep.
And yet there's something, and I think, maybe the movie Braveheart is a really interesting example of this. Braveheart is in so many ways a brutal, ugly, unsatisfying movie that is not a feel-good movie, right? And yet in so many ways it embodies a Christian worldview because it reflects the world as it actually is. And it's not gratuitous. It shows sin and historical context, and then it makes a point with that. So you, for your Ascend project, I believe, had part in writing and directing a show about Sherlock Holmes. Do I have the details mostly right here?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah. So take that same idea. So that idea of kind of, moving to light or moving to darkness. Sherlock Holmes is not a Christian story, if we're using that poor definition, right? I mean, there's no altar call at the end of it. Sherlock doesn't get converted. And yet there's a way then to portray, to direct and act in and write a Sherlock story that has a range, but it's not like you would look at Sherlock Holmes and say, oh, that's clearly one or the other. And yet I think that a Christian motivation will have a different product there. Okay. That's a little bit abstract, but take that a little bit, as you were directing, writing, producing the Sherlock Holmes play, you were doing that from a Christian worldview, yet your Sherlock Holmes play didn't have an altar call, didn't have anything ostensibly Christian about it. What made it Christian? What did you do differently than, say, somebody else would have, who would have come from a Buddhist or a secular or a naturalist worldview?
Well, first of all, I want to say this, and I absolutely love your perspective here. I think that if you do not explore the messy and the bad and the dark, it's not a Christian story, because you're then
Agree.
leaving out the entire purpose that we need salvation and that we need Jesus. And it's just true. If we want to stay in that cushy, everything is good world, we no longer have an enemy, we no longer need our savior, etc., etc. And that's not a Christian story, because the whole point is admitting we're really broken, this is really bad, please help us. And so that's number one. And number two is that I think it is so important for yes, art to explore that well. I've always made this distinction between literature, film, etc., that I think grapples with darkness really well. You can either leave your audience with the dark and say, that's it, this is hopeless, everything kind of sucks. Or you can say, hey, this is the reality. This is why it's really important to pursue something greater. Here's the conviction, here's the light, here's the hope for the future and for the redemption. And so, like, for instance, I love Les Miserables. It's possibly my favorite musical ever. And my siblings in jest often make fun of me. They're like, okay, so you just like to be depressed and you like to, right? Which I guess would be the trademark of that show. But at the end, what's happening? Actually, every person that fought and died for their country defending innocence is reunited in heaven singing about how God brings a better day. And to me, that's worth watching the children die in the street, not because that's fun, but because it was real and because it's bringing light to that situation, right? So writing Sherlock, one of the things that we identified very early on in the process was, like I said earlier, the messaging we're going to send with it. Because yeah, we want to do right by God. Doesn't mean that Sherlock Holmes has anything to do with the gospel. It doesn't. What it does have to do with is a pursuit of truth, which we've majorly lost in today's society, and nobody knows how to find things out for themselves anymore. We rely on a lot of artificial intelligence and a lot of corrupt media. And I'm sorry, but it feels like 1984, and we're all allowing ourselves to be brainwashed and duped into something that's pretty dim. But the pursuit of truth and the seeking of that, and secondly, the copious amounts of fun that is had in celebrating individuality and quirks and gifting and relationships and synergy. I gotta tell you, my favorite part about the Sherlock Holmes series in general, whether that is the original books or the many different film and TV adaptations, is the tie between Sherlock and Watson, right? They so desperately need each other. And don't we all so desperately need the people in our lives that complement us and bring us this synergy and don't allow us to be ruined by our fault, but allow us to be strengthened because of them by our strength. And so those things all to me were things that God very clearly identifies as good, and God very clearly asks us to celebrate and to study. And so those were just some of the pinpointed ones. Again, coming from Christian backbone, but not Christian bashing over the head, which I loved. And then also, the choices that you do make in terms of the bad guys and the darkness. So we established you need to explore the darkness, you need to go there. There has to be evil to combat with goodness, or else all of that is unnecessary, and then it's the opposite of Christian. How far do you go? Because again, here's my thing. Here's what I always come back to. Is it done responsibly? Are you leaving people with the brokenness and with the depression? Or are you saying, this is really real, but here's how we combat it? And so, especially for the audiences that we're dealing with, and I think that's a huge part of being a responsible artist, is paying attention to your audience, having a finger on the pulse, right? What do they need to hear? What can they be challenged to hear? Et cetera, et cetera. There was no part of us as a writing team, as a production team, that felt like we needed to just go into all the ways that Moriarty would kill his men. Or, talk about what the group of Cockney street urchins are really doing in their day in and day out. You don't have to rub people's faces in something that is grotesque or less than or of the enemy in order to get the message across, right? So there are degrees of how far you have to go. So yeah, in Braveheart, the point is, this is what these people were exposed to. We were at the point of the prima nocta and all of this stuff. So yes, we're going to go and we're going to brutally kill people to defend our country. Great, because that's the degree of the story that you're trying to tell. It makes a lot of sense. With the, this is the cause, this is the effect, and the price we have to pay for it. I think you have to pay attention to. And I think if you don't pay attention to that, then you're being irresponsible and you're being unnecessary, and you're not really going to serve as much good as you hoped.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was a great kind of walking through that. At the end of the day, there's the stories that we tell will be the stories that direct actions. There's an incorrect, maybe uniquely American idea that our motivations, our actions, our decisions come from inside of us. And in reality, and there's some aspect of that certainly, and as a Christian would say they do, and that's bad news. that's going to be an evil result. And yet, I think there's a reality that we choose to do the things that we do primarily because of a sense of identity and the sense of direction that we get from outside of us. And the most powerful sense of direction that we get comes from the stories that we believe and that we understand, that we know. The stories that of our community, the stories of our country, the stories of our faith. And so to tell good stories isn't mere entertainment. It's at the deepest level, it's instruction. And then to tell stories through dance and the way somebody uses their body, to tell stories through the stage and to think deliberately about how and why we're telling those stories, that ends up being an opportunity, a colossal opportunity to shed light. And so I think that to observe that and think about that, and then to thoughtfully press in, as you have done a great job explaining here, is, think through, like, what is the purpose? What is this show for? And so, yeah, I mean, there is a reality of the evils here and these things I'm reflecting. I don't have to reflect all of that to get across the point that I'm getting, and that my purpose is. So, well, Briley, what's next for you as you look forward and dream big beyond, the kind of easy light schedule you've got now? What are some of the things that you aspire to if we look 5 or 6 years over the horizon?
I'm heading into my senior year of college, which is very exciting and a little bit daunting. My family has had an arts ministry for the past, I believe, 7 years. And it's been a continual prayer as to what God wants us to do with that exactly. My parents met working in 20th Century Fox. My brother is headed into film as well. And I say that my mom's children all just get more intelligent and talented on down the line as they are put out. I'm the oldest, so there you go. I'm just for reference there.
The laziest Crisafi, we could tell.
Right. That's exactly what I meant. So no, but in a genuine sense, if it's God's will, I'd really like to formally go into business with my family and have a functioning, more independent studio where we can have the conservatory, doing student productions and everything like that. And then also have a space for the professional work that myself and my brother have kind of been accumulating, because I have really loved watching the fruits of that in recent years, and I have truly admired it. In the same sense, I am just continually blown away by the people that God allows me to very genuinely network with. I used to really hate the word networking because it felt so tit for tat. And if you do this for me, then I'll do that for you. And that was so against my nature. But I've recently been able to learn that it's actually such a beautiful thing, and that it can just be a web of awesome people who want to build each other up and give each other opportunities and take advantage of iron sharpening iron, which is what we're meant to do. Talk about synergy, right? So I've been really grateful just to keep working with people who are professionals, and it kind of blows me away. Like I said, when I was just working with her choreographer was original Fosse dancer for 20 years, and the different crazy things. So I think when people ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? Or what's the 10-year plan? My honest answer is I want to do everything that I'm doing right now, but bigger and better. And not bigger and better as in making more money or accumulating more, PR or fame in any sense of its word. I want to be doing it bigger and better in the sense that I'm reaching more people, allowing God to speak through me even more intentionally by getting to know him better and better, and just being able to cast that net and also do what people have done for me. People have poured into me and given me some ridiculous opportunities. I mean, I look back, on the people that have just handed me really crazy shots at getting to learn and grow and experience and do. Can be more grateful. And I hope to be that person, that instructor, that is able to see something really special in other people and give them the tools to run with it and equip them to keep making that ripple effect. So I apologize if that's a boring answer since it's so non-concrete and so abstract. I
Oh yeah,
I probably
we
sound
were
like
David and I were totally bored. I could tell. Yeah, as you can see David yawning there. So no, Bradley, I think that's
that was
excellent. I was thinking that it'll be pretty fun to first of all, I don't believe in 10-year plans either. It's more like what do you aspire and then how will it turn out? And I suspect that parts of it will be nothing like you expected. But I would also say that, and Bradley, I offer this as a word of encouragement. I have spent the last 5 years watching dreams that I dreamed 20 years ago and had almost given up on come to fruition. And so
Amen.
there's an element here where God does things in ways you're just completely unexpecting. And then there's an element that God often works and brings things to fruition. There are things that I had let go a long, long time ago, thinking they were not going to come about, and then they did. Bound certainly one of those. And so there'll be a lot of excitement to see how that all turns out, and I'll certainly be interested to watch. In the meantime, if you want to watch more immediately, let's go through the list here. So first of all, Wisdom Harbor, you can find that at andyandrews.com, and you should check out all
Sure.
things Andy Andrews and Wisdom Harbor. Andy's a pretty cool guy, but Briley's there too. So there's your attraction to get over there. So check that out. And then if you're in Florida, you should check out your family's, the school that you work with, so tell people what that is.
Yes, that's Veritas, Florida. And then our other ministry is through First Presbyterian Church in North Palm Beach.
So check out those things. And then finally, you said the name and I forgot it. I apologize. But the studio that you're choreographer,
Absolutely all right. That's the
choreography
Mulch
for.
Jupiter Theater, which is a regional theater in Jupiter. Right there in the title.
So there you go. So that's your homework, everybody. If you're listening, you can check out all those things, particularly if you're in Florida, you'll be close by. So, Briley, thanks. We appreciate the time today. We appreciate the time last week. That was all our practice run for today. And I'll be watching with great anticipation to see what comes next. And I suspect you'll be back.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I really enjoyed my time here today. You guys have a great one.
Well, in this case, second time was the charm. So we're delighted to have Briley back. And it kind of was actually fun because we got to sort of talk about some things last time on the failed recording that we mentioned. And that also sort of set us up for a deeper conversation. And I hope that you appreciate that deeper conversation. I thought, David, that Briley had some good answers, some of which I was expecting to some extent about some of those questions. And then quite a few that gave me some additional perspective. I thought that her explanation of how she danced differently or choreographed dance differently, and then, of course, how they set up the Sherlock show, both had some really good insight in terms of how Christians can be an active witness and certainly relationally, and she talked about that, but maybe in some ways more importantly in how they actually carry out their art in these settings. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think it's so common for those of us who have grown up in Christian culture and around church to think of Christian art and then kind of immediately go to, like you mentioned, the example of God's Not Dead and some things like that. And, those certainly have their place, but I think it is really interesting to think through what it actually looks like to have your Christian worldview fully influence every part of the art and not just have it be just a kind of sermon tacked on the end, kind of like you guys were talking about. And yeah, I think it's not something that I think a lot of people think about in terms of just how many areas that can affect, whether it's how you're interacting with the other people that you're performing the art with, or the people who are, behind the scenes, and just how all of that is carried out. And I think it's just a really cool testament and an extension to the fact that our Christian faith can and absolutely should affect every area of our lives and how we go about every single thing that we do. And so I think this is a really cool reminder.
It's a reminder, nothing's off limits and everything has the opportunity to be redeemed. And part of your job as a Christian is to be part of that redemption. And I thought Briley illustrated that quite well. Well, it's been fun. We've had a run of podcasts recently where we've interviewed folks that we knew through Unbound. And I think it's interesting. We're not doing that because they're Unbound students. We're doing that because we know them and we think they're cool people. And we happen to know them because they were from Unbound. And I'm always a little cautious. Briley was an extraordinarily talented person before she came to Unbound. And I don't know that we added anything in terms of her ability to do art. Although maybe we gave her an ability to think about it and reflect on it. We could take some credit there. Some of the other guests we've had were high-performing people, and certainly we added value there at some level. But all of them, I think, have talked about on the show, and unprompted, by the way, about how the community that surrounded Unbound has enhanced and allowed them to use the gifts that they have to do more than they would have thought they could do otherwise. And so I just think that's worth noting and illustrating, and just reminding everybody that, if you're looking for a kind of community that's filled with these kinds of people, and look, we could probably do a podcast every week for the next 5 years just doing our own students in terms of the kind of interesting, exceptional, extraordinary folks we have. And that's maybe all I need to say. That's the kind of community. The kinds of people that have been on this show recently are actually common in the sense that that's the caliber of folks that we typically work with in the Unbound community. And there's lots of ways to do that. So from high school and college age students, we have programs for all of those. So check us out at beunbound.us. And if you're interested, we still have space, although it's rapidly running out for this fall class and those programs now, but not for much longer. And so make sure that you check that out if you're interested in doing it this fall. Thank you so much again for your time. I hope that this inspires you to go out and look for and tell good stories. And whatever you are, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, there's an opportunity for you to play a part in the redemption of that for the kingdom of Christ. Until next time, be unbound.